So, greetings, colleagues, and welcome to our special interest group Policy Advocacy for WONCA next webinar, which we're very honoured to have Professor Karen Flegg, our president, with us as our presenter. I'm Amanda Howe, and I'm also going to let my co-chair, Dr. Sankha Randenikumara, say hello. Sankha? Except he's muted.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone.
Thank you. And we have run webinars since the SIG started, trying to help to inform people about policy advocacy and the different things that have worked in people's lives and experience at different levels. So this one in particular, we're delighted that our colleague Karen is going to be our presenter. Now, Karen, of course, most of you will know quite well in her current role, and she also has had many other experiences, some of which she's going to draw on for her talk today. She's worked as a family doctor, particularly in rural areas in Australia. She's had a long career in different medical organisations, including being a chief executive in some or government manager in others. Sadly, tonight she's got a really bad cold, so she's already told us it's the evening and she's feeling really tired, but she's agreed to continue with her presentation, and we're very grateful. But if you see her pause, cough, or drink lots of water, you will understand why. So, Karen, thank you very much for that. And I think if you would like to start, Madam President, you would be very welcome.
Dear colleagues, thank you for coming, and thank you Amanda and Sankha. Today I want to talk about leading from behind, and I want to talk about various aspects: having a go, networking, trust, delegation, being tapped on the shoulder, doing the tapping. I'd like to describe how I got involved in organisations and talk about choice and chance and some other thoughts. So, what are the formative influences? I went to a lecture on leadership from a sporting guru who told us everything that happened was choice and not chance. But I think some of it is chance. Where we come from, who we come from, and in our early years, we have little choice about who we learn from. That situation changes. So, where do I come from? I come from a large multicultural country, Australia, and here it is compared in size to Europe. We actually have to go overseas to go to any other country, and I think some of that is quite formative. Who do I come from? My ancestors are English and Irish. They were forced immigrants, mostly, and that means that they were sent to Australia as prisoners or convicts a couple of 100 years ago. My dad was a teacher who believed in education as much for female as male children, quite rare for a man of his era. He was also a volunteer in community organisations like Rotary, and as a child I watched him chair meetings. That came in handy much later on. So, who have I learnt from? Definitely my parents, family, friends, teachers, yes. This is teacher Bruce. He was the most influential teacher I've had. He taught me 55 years ago when I was in 5th and 6th grade, about age 10 and 11. I saw him as recently as March this year, and he still had words of wisdom for me as the WONCA World President. But what about other supervisors, mentors, colleagues and more? As a newly graduated doctor, I entered the GP specialist training program, and they said to me, "Where do you want to go for your first placement?" And I said, "Oh, about as far from Sydney as possible." "Why?" "Because I want to try something different." "Oh, you can go to Warrialda. It's only 9 hours drive away." So the message there was that trying different things has been a fundamental personality feature of mine that's enabled me to do a lot of things where policy and advocacy have been required. So this was Warialda. Place of wild honey is what the name means, and it's a sheep and wheat farming town. Now, we all have clinical mentors, and in Australia, as a young doctor in the GP specialist training program, we are given designated supervisors in our practice. In Warialda, my supervisors were Doctors John and Dr. Michael, and Warialda, being a long way from anywhere else, meant that I really needed and valued their help. We were about 3 hours' drive from a major centre. Doctors John and Michael guided me in their clinic and the hospital for my first 6 months. It was on-the-job mentorship. In addition, John and his wife took me to my first rural Rotary meeting in this hotel, which still stands, and that began my exposure to community organisations. So my early experience was that policy and advocacy was done after joining groups or organisations, and my experience was on boards of those community and professional organisations. How did that happen? I said yes, and I want to talk about how I got the same sort of support as I did in the early years of learning general practice. So, at age 25, I was still in the GP training program, and I went to a town called Muswellbrook, famous for wine and horses. I met Sandy, a woman who worked for the Muswellbrook Community Information Centre, which supports patients and the community with various types of information. One day she said to me, "You're the new doctor in town. Come and join the board of the Community Information Centre." I said, yes, okay. Little did I know that I was to be the chair of the board. So in my innocence, I said yes, but in retrospect, this was the beginning of a long career that I've had on boards of organisations. At 31, I had finished my GP fellowship training and I thought I might help out at the exams. My practice boss, Dr. Sandra, actually ran those exams, and I said, "I'd be happy to help you organise the RACGP fellowship exams, Sandra. Dear Karen, you can take over. You're now running the exams in our state. Thank you very much, Dr. Sandra." And that's how I came to be the chief examiner in my state on those exams. So some years later, at age 37, I was still running the exams, and my state board said, "We need a new state representative on our national Royal Australian College of General Practitioners board. Don't worry, it's just a few meetings in Melbourne. It's nice to go on trips there." And so I was put on the board of the RACGP, a WONCA member organisation. Here I am in my academic gown, with my WONCA chain, and with Dr. Michael Wright, who's been the president of that RACGP for about 2 weeks now. So what was the reality for those nice trips to Melbourne? At age 37, I'm the same age as the RACGP. The reality was that I was the second person under 40 and only the third woman on that board in 37 years. The room was full of men. The meetings were formal. You had to stand to speak, and I was addressed as the member for New South Wales, not by my name. At meeting number 1, I felt lost. Inwardly, I was going, "Help!" So what did I do? I sat in the room. I looked around the room. I thought to myself, I need a mentor or I'm not going to survive. I chose a man in the room who I would like to be my mentor by the way he conducted himself and his obvious knowledge of the content in question. Enter Mentor Michael, Secretary General of the RACGP. And I said, "Dear Michael, I need to learn what it took you 20 years to learn, but I want to do it in only 1 year." Okay, we started learning. That happened, and about a year later, Mentor Michael said, "Karen, why not stand for the Treasurer role on the RACGP board?" The Treasurer was a much higher level role than being just the member for my state. And I said, "Oh, dear Mentor Michael, I know nothing about being a treasurer." "Of course," he said, "I will teach you." And so I became the treasurer of the RACGP, also under age 40, and still only the third woman on the board. That was when I started learning about governance and how strong processes are needed before you start to do anything. So a little bit of advice, I guess. After joining groups and organisations, work out what support you need, just as you do in clinical practice. Get a mentor. Do continuous professional development, just as you do in general practice. So for my professional development, I went to the Australian Institute of Company Directors. It's an organisation that runs courses to help people become the director or a member of the board of companies and organisations. I did a 1-week course and I still do their CPD today. They teach you about the sort of things you need to know on a board, things like financial literacy, risk, and just plain good governance. And these things have really helped me in roles like being WONCA President, which involves chairing a board and it needs a knowledge of governance. Right. It was about this time I started thinking about styles of leadership. And I'd offer you a quote from Nelson Mandela and his book on Long Walk to Freedom. He wrote, "It is better to lead from behind than to put others in front, especially when you celebrate victory and when nice things occur. You take the front line when there is danger." So what does leading from behind involve? The key attributes of this mindset, and this is how I've found my best teachers in the past, actually include: show humility to hear, see and understand others. Ask questions, to engage and listen. Inspire your team members with stories, examples and benefits, and work with the team to create a healthy culture. Strive for consensus decision making. Assure that goals are met, and step up when assertive leadership is needed. I would add to that, delegate whole tasks to people and check back to see if they need help. Support our junior and less experienced colleagues to have a go and then be there when you're needed. Become a mentor. At my university, I've delegated some committees and tasks. I've given others ownership of part of the work, and that helps me with my time management too, which is a win-win. This is Dr. Sama Balasubramanian, and he takes the lead on clinical skills for me. It's been a great relief to me. So, having a bit of fun with the slides there. Okay, so networking. It's worth a little chat about that in particular. And what does it mean? The Oxford English Dictionary describes networking as the action or process of interacting with others to exchange information and develop professional or social contacts. So what makes you want to network? Some of the things that have made me want to network include a gap. So no nurses or psychologists in my team. Sometimes it's been a fight against a new situation or old view, like climate change. Sometimes an idea is born by doing the networking when I've just gone to meet someone. So why bother with networking? Go back to the 1990s and our small local GP organisation that I was running mainly organised seminars for our members. We'd had a process of a needs assessment, and that told us that our GPs wanted an education session on palliative care. So off I went to meet the Director of Palliative Care at the local hospital. That was Dr. David, and I said, "The GPs would like an evening education session, please, Dr. David." Dr. David said, "Oh, well, palliative care has a workforce shortage, so how about we do several sessions and really upskill the GPs to better manage palliative patients at home?" And then he said, "Do you think any of the GPs would like even higher level skills to come and do some work in our palliative care unit and help our workforce shortage?" So the short story is we ended up with a program of various levels of skill, from basic GP knowledge to a higher level, and that enabled a couple of our GPs to do some part-time work in the palliative care unit with Dr. David. So that was a win-win situation. Another win-win situation happened this September when WONCA Executive had a meeting and did some networking with John Fogarty, the primary healthcare lead at WHO and our liaison person in WHO. So how did that happen? He'd reached out by email to me, and I decided to invite him to our executive meeting in London. You know, he's from Geneva, we're in London. For an Australian, they're really close, and I thought, oh, maybe he will come. WONCA's never had their WHO liaison person come to a meeting that I know of, and you don't lose anything by asking these sort of outrageous questions. Anyway, of course, he said yes. And so we learnt about each other. We ate a meal together. We discussed where to for WONCA and WHO in the future. And in the picture you can see me there with Dr. John Fogarty and Jane Namatovu, our WONCA Africa Region President, and Vivi Martinez-Bianchi on the right, our President-elect. So I think that was another win-win situation. I thought I'd share with you a COVID story. It seems that we all need to do that these days, and there were certainly plenty of learnings from that. Excuse me. In COVID, I worked in the Northern Territory part of Australia, right in the centre of the country in the red ringed area on the map. It's a desert, it's very isolated, and as an example, to get to work, our remote medical team either drove if it was under 4 hours drive, or flew if it was over 4 hours drive. We were based in Alice Springs, a town of 15,000, but some of the communities we went out to work in for 1 to 4 days a week might have only had 100 people, and even the largest had 1,000 people. During COVID, the roads were blocked, but we still went out to the communities with a special permit. So here we've got Doctors Bruce and Jenny on the right who were driving, and Doctors Richard and David who were going in a Royal Flying Doctor Service plane to somewhere further away. So in COVID, the biggest challenges proved to be getting our primary care doctors from the remote community clinics and the remote clinic nurses accepted as frontline health workers for early vaccination. They also involve working out how to adequately vaccinate the local people who were so very vulnerable due to multiple comorbidities and such long distances to evacuate them to hospital when they were sick. So what did I do? So the remote doctors were not considered frontline health workers when it came to getting early COVID vaccines. Only the hospital staff in the main town could be vaccinated. We were not given appointments. Very distressing, and we were practicing. This is Dr. Richard and Dr. Chris on the right-hand side doing PPE donning and doffing. One week, I heard that the vaccination team was looking for hospital workers on a Friday to vaccinate but couldn't find any. So I had a discussion with the leader of the team, and I discovered that on Fridays they were desperate to use up all the doses in those multi-dose vials that we had the vaccines in. If they didn't use them on a Friday, they had to dispose of them, throw them out in the rubbish. And then they have to report how many wasted doses they had to the federal government. Now, that was not a good thing, to have to report that you'd wasted doses. So I knew that my doctors were in town on Friday each week. So each week on Friday morning, I rang the vaccination team leader and I found out the number of doses that they had to be left over later on Friday, and I sent over that number of my doctor team members to be vaccinated. The end result? My remote medical team got vaccinated early, and the vaccination team had no waste to report for a month anyway. So that was another example of a win-win situation. The second problem was a bit more difficult, and that was dealing with the thoughts and views of the local Aboriginal people who we wanted to vaccinate eventually. You know, colonial history influences current thoughts and rumours in my country, and some of the rumours going around were things such as COVID is a white man's disease and won't affect us Aboriginal people. And on the vaccinations, some thought they were a government genocide plot. A bit later, when we started talking about evacuating contacts, that raised memories of forced relocation to missions and government communities in days gone by, but not so long ago that the older generation had forgotten. So, what did I do? I developed a plan over 2 years, remembering COVID was quite slow to get to this part of Australia as the state had shut all its borders. I knew we needed to network in communities and solve the problems. My remote GP teams were trusted, and they could promote vaccination by example. I also knew that there were trusted community elders in the communities that we needed to engage. We needed them to share information with us, and we needed to hear the issues that were coming up in the communities from them. Issues such as concern about food security if people were in home care in the community. I addressed this through arranging support from charities. The other thing we addressed was the issue of us as the medical group wanting to evacuate people to Alice Springs for both isolation and treatment. But we learnt we had to take the specialised care out to the people. This was culturally acceptable, and interestingly, it used less workforce. So, another win-win solution through networking. Okay, so what about doing advocacy when you're not an expert? And I suspect some of you are thinking, but I'm not an expert. How can you then do advocacy? So if you're not an expert, the first thing you need to do is find out more. Even if you are an expert, you still get the evidence. I've used Barbara Starfield over and over again as a resource doing talks on the case for primary care and why primary care is important. And for the record, it's better health outcomes, lower costs, and greater equity in health. So go to the expert, go to the person who's done the research. Sorry, another little glitch with the slides there. Second, you can get a team. Now, last year at the 2023 WONCA World Conference, it was held in Sydney where I grew up, I wanted a green theme. I wanted to promote my platform of planetary health. But the core team who actually pushed forward the whole green event in Sydney was the WONCA Working Party on Planetary Health. As some of their members are seen here, Sankha is one of the leaders of this WONCA group. In the end, we had a highly successful Green Day with a press conference to promote the end of fossil fuels, and also many people wore green on that day to make it a really big success. So the team of the Working Party got behind me, and then on top of that, the team of the people at the conference got behind the green idea. What else can you do? Sometimes you recommend others. So this year, the WONCA Asia Pacific Region Conference had a bit of a planetary health theme going, and they approached me to locate an expert from not too far away from Singapore to speak at the conference to deliver a keynote speech. Now, I'd seen a young doctor, an Australian woman, Dr. Catherine Pendry, lead the press conference that we held in WONCA Sydney. I saw how fantastic she was, how much preparation she'd done to make sure she got the right message across. When I asked her about doing this keynote in Singapore, it seemed that she'd never done an international speech before. I tried to assure her that she had the right level of knowledge to carry it off. I knew I was correct, and time bore it out. She did the keynote. She did a fantastic job. She was fabulous. So recommending others can be a strength. Back to the thought about I'm not an expert, which I'm sure some of you will identify with. The Lancet Commission on Sustainable Healthcare came to me and said, "We want you on our executive committee." I said, "What? Why? Why me? I'm not an expert. Do you want me to send a WONCA expert? We have many in our working party on planetary health." No, we want you because of your green commitment, but also because of your primary healthcare knowledge. So, the lesson is sometimes they do want you. I said yes, I've learnt more, and I used my team's expertise from my WONCA Working Party on planetary health. Oops, we think you've missed one. No, we're fine. So, delegation. No leader can do it alone. We need a team. We need to delegate, especially if, like me, you want to be careful of your carbon footprint and not travel to every possible event you can in the world. I believe there are great people everywhere. Trust. This is my team that I worked with in the desert of Iran, out on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, when I did a mission with Médecins Sans Frontières some years ago. There was a language barrier with some of them, but they were still a great team, and I still trusted them because we were operating in their environment. Delegate. Right, now, you've heard me talk about WONCA and WHO. WONCA is represented at regional events, and we make a lot of effort for this. As World President, I do not go to region meetings. This year, Brian Chang, the WONCA President of the Asia Pacific region, he's the guy in the suit in the photos, went to the WHO Western Pacific Regional Organisation meeting in Manila in March. And he took a team with him. He took a team of people from the Philippines, VIP GPs, but people active in WONCA. He took Aileen Espina, Honorary Secretary of WONCA Asia Pacific, Leilani Nicodemus from the WONCA Asia Pacific Executive, and young doctor from the Philippines, Mel Aquavera. So I've delegated those jobs for obvious reasons to the region president, but he's taken a great team with him. A couple of good messages there. Delegate is one of them. Right, I love this quote. It comes from the first WONCA president. WONCA was founded in 1972 in Melbourne, and this first president was an Australian. It was Dr. Monty Kent Hughes. The quote is, "The future of our professional discipline will depend on our ability to work together in the service of humanity." A strong message 50 years later. But how do we work together? Is it about networking? Perhaps. So how do you start? Just do it. Say yes, do something, join something. Join a WONCA working party and special interest group. More on that in a minute. Do something, present at a conference on something you do know about. Write a poster. I've just mentioned WONCA's working parties and special interest groups. Next one, Sankha, and they are great places to work together. But who are they and what things do they do? Now here you'll see a very long list of WONCA's working parties and special interest groups and a QR code to take you to the page where they are listed and where you can click on them and look at what each group does. And there's also a link to join those groups. It tells you what they do. If there's something you're interested in, I suggest you just join and find out more. Next one, Sankha. One of the other things I recommend to you is to come to a WONCA conference. WONCA conferences for me are all about networking and making new friends. So how can you do that this year? Next slide, Sankha. In 2025, the first conference that we will be having is in India. It's the WONCA South Asia Region Conference coming in Bengaluru from the 4th to the 6th of April 2025. And those guys are extremely well organised. I think they could probably run it tomorrow if they had to. So should be a good conference. Next one, Sankha. Not long after that, there is the WONCA Asia Pacific Region Conference coming to Busan in South Korea, April 24 to 27. And of course, the Korean Academy of Family Physicians have run a previous WONCA conference only in 2018 when they ran the World Conference. So again, that should be another good event. Next one, Sankha. Now I did see Dora Bernal here recently, but she seems to have dropped off. She could have done this advertisement for me in Spanish because in May, the South America or Iberoamericana region, which is also called CIMF, CIMF, has their Cumbre and their Congress between the 21st and 24th of May in Montevideo, Uruguay. And Sankha, I think we will be doing some Spanish translation, so people will be able to hear about that too. Finally, the other conference we have known dates for next year, next slide, Sankha, is our WONCA World Conference. Now that's being held in Lisbon from the 17th to the 21st of September. And it's probably going to be huge. Lisbon's had a WONCA conference before, a WONCA Europe one, I think about 10 years ago, and it was a huge conference. So that one should be really interesting. So I encourage you all to put in abstracts, present something. You don't have to be an expert on everything, and you possibly don't have to be the expert to be brave enough to present. Next slide, Sankha. Now, this is a QR code that you can go to see the list of the WONCA conferences that we have dates for. I do expect there will be also possibly one in the East Mediterranean region, but we don't have exact dates for that at this point. So here's a page to go to find out more about WONCA conferences. If you can't go to a conference, it's not a reason not to join a working party or special interest group. They often have meetings online, and in fact that's what we're doing here today. We're at one of the events of the special interest group of Policy and Advocacy. So you don't have to go to a conference to be part of a group and participate. Thanks everyone. That's it, Sankha, that's the last slide.
Karen, thank you so much. And your voice stood up beautifully and the text was really interesting. I'm not just saying that. I thought it was really good. Sorry about the technical hitches. We'll have some work to do to make the recording for tonight's seminar, but that's our problem. I haven't actually got any questions or comments in the chat. And when we lost the chat from the other recordings, I actually hadn't got any. So maybe I'll start, and then if other people want to chip in. I probably can see hands on this number if you want to put yellow hand on the up. But your points, absolutely. I echo my experience because, again, I ended up being WONCA president in a way that, I would never have predicted or indeed aimed at. But I think trying things, particularly if people encourage you and say, come and try this, and if they think you're good enough and you're worth it, unless you think it's really inappropriate or you simply haven't got time, then go and have a go, say yes, and learn from that and get the wider experience. As you say, find people who you think will be supportive, especially if some of those things are very new or very challenging, and draw on them to make sure, A, you feel okay, and B, you get it right. And then the learning from behind stuff, that side, absolutely brilliant. The team, adding the expertise, stepping up if you have to, but, holding the group, but also giving other people the opportunity to learn. So I think that was really good. And you gave us some examples through WONCA of how people could do that at different career stages or through different groups. I guess the only big picture that we're still always talking about is how to make sure that family medicine and primary health care get the resources that we need and the status that we deserve. And liaising with WHO, as you said, is a very important part of that, but also getting onto the world stage and actually putting our voice into those settings. Ping Fu Yong Wang asks, it says, very inspiring, Professor Karen. What challenges have you faced when it comes to delegating? Good question.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Ping Fu, and nice to see you here. I think sometimes the problem with delegating has been was the same as my response when I was younger, is people don't feel that they can do something. The example I gave was Catherine, who needed a little bit of reassurance and pushing to go and do that keynote at a WONCA regional conference, and I knew she'd do a great job. So sometimes it's difficult to get people engaged, but I think that is lessened if they know that you're prepared to be there for them and check in whether they know what to do and help them if they don't know what to do. I think the other reluctance that sometimes happens is that if people think they're going to be delegated the photocopying, for example, so a minor part, and not have any responsibility, that can be an unattractive position for them. So that's why I say delegate a whole task and let them take responsibility and get the praise for it.
Great, thank you. Sankha, do you have anything that you would like to ask or comment on?
No, I wanted to ask something regarding the challenges as well, but I think already Ping Fu asked that, so I'm fine.
I think, Karen, my other one is maybe you'll want me to answer this for myself. What are some of the real difficulties? What you get stuck in a situation which you feel you can't resolve, and it gets frustrating, and indeed maybe your team is also frustrated, and how do you deal with the sort of emotions around situations that you can't resolve short term, or are bigger than us and too difficult? And then I've got another question for you after that.
Yeah, look, Amanda, I'm reminded of when I was on the board of the College of General Practitioners in New Zealand, another WONCA organisation, and we did strive for consensus decision making. That meant if we were going to take a vote and 80% didn't want something and 20% did, we would listen to really to what people thought was the problem with what the proposal was, go away and work on it, come back. The next time maybe 50-50, but that wasn't good enough. So we would still listen to what needed improving, go away, work on it, come back, and maybe eventually we would get 80 or 90% in favour of something. But that might take a year. It might take 18 months. So I think, Amanda, the frustration can often be in the short term. There's often other people that you can ask for input. You know, I'm happy to come to Amanda for her ideas on something when we're stuck on something at times in the current WONCA team, and Amanda gives her input. There is usually somebody else outside that core team, but who has knowledge of the issues, who can actually give advice. And I would say also, Amanda, earlier you talked about the place of primary care. I think that starts at real grassroots thing in little local areas where I started in a local GP group. We were always battling for our place in the health system. And that's why when Dr. David offered to train up people in palliative care, we were really excited because it enhanced our standing and our place in that little local area. So it crosses all levels of, geographical distribution, from a really local group to a city to a state or region or municipality or, up to a country and then the world.
Absolutely. And again, I'd echo that point, colleagues. In our previous webinars and in some of the theory of policy advocacy, we always suggest that you think micro, meso, macro, local level, organizational level, national level, because often you need to be able to act at more than one of those. But for each of us, the most important may be our local context. Dora put in the chat, very nice, sharing your experiences. Losing your fear and believing in yourself are surely the most powerful instruments to start. Thank you, Dora. And I think that's a process.
Muchas gracias, Dora.
Yes. But I think that's a process in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because as Karen showed us, and I've had that experience at the beginning, you have some lack of confidence, and that's quite natural. And then, but still you believe in the vision, maybe not in your ability, but in the vision that you're pursuing. And that builds your persistence and it builds your resilience, and you also learn. Dr. Omar asked about delegation. What about bias in delegating people? Now, I think that's a big risk. I've experienced that as a woman, that the senior men in my younger career would always choose other men to take those new roles. So they weren't choosing me to give me the opportunity to learn. They would choose other people. So what about bias when you're delegating, which can be subconscious?
Well, yes, there is some, isn't there? And if you're the team leader, you've got the ultimate decision about who to delegate to. I always like to think that I looked around, as I did when I needed a mentor, and tried to find the best person for a task, or the person that would do the best job of a task, because even within a team, there are some people who might do one task better than the others, and then someone different for another task. So that depends, I think, on the integrity of the leader to some degree, Amanda.
Yes, and also the team around them, I think, sometimes can say, look, boss, if you are listening to your team, they can change your mind as well. Omar also asked about training, and this is a discussion we've had, of course, in the policy advocacy group, and it's something we're hoping to do through WONCA, is to put some of this material into a sort of toolkit so that you guys can draw on it and use it to learn. And we've got some exciting opportunities there. But also in my specialist training now in my college, for example, in the UK, they're trying to put more of these components into the core curriculum, because it really does matter. As a family doctor, you're usually going to be leading a team. You're usually going to be interfacing with the community and different agencies, and having that core understanding that you can articulate to yourself is really important. So thanks for that, Omar.
Yeah, I think that's important, Amanda. I mean, as you saw, I did a 1-week course on how to be on the board of an organisation or company and continue to do professional development, because that group that ran it, which I'm a member of, requires mandatory CPD, just as the RACGP requires of me in general practice. So I think that's the case. But Amanda, we also in Australia consider that in the domains of general practice or family medicine, there's a professional and ethical role, which isn't just limited to your interaction with patients. It's also about your work in the clinic, the work in the community, and also in organisations, particularly professional organisations, at those different levels we've described.
Absolutely. And it's making those sort of conscious, and again, later in our career too, to have those learning conversations, we call it in English, where these sort of webinars, CPDs, the WONCA groups can, I think, really help. So that's very good. Colleagues, time, we're within the last 5 minutes, and I don't see any more comments in the chat. So maybe I will start to round up. We talked a little bit about our special interest group. You are welcome to join via the portal. Many of you will already be members. I'm pleased to say that we now have regional leads and colleagues from most of the WONCA regions who are helping us and have started to run webinars in other places. Mariano is on the call, ran a great one in Ibero-America and so on. That's great. And indeed, Nick Mamo, who is on the call, I think William and Mariano, when we finish the recording, please log back onto the link and we'll have our conversation about the next steps for the working party, for the SIG, and if colleagues have ideas about what else would be useful, what else could we do as a SIG that would help you in your place, or you would like to see online or at conferences, please, ask. And we would also try in all those conferences you advertise, President, to have a presence and presentations there, so we keep building this momentum to help people to continue to build on all the wisdom that you've shared with us. So Karen, thank you for making the presentation, taking the time. I know it takes a lot of your time when you're busy anyway. Hope you feel better soon. We will show the recording again tonight for colleagues in other time zones, and Sankha is kindly going to host a second webinar so they can share the wisdom and build on it. Sankha, is there anything else you would like to say? And then Karen, I will let you have the last word.
Thank you, Amanda. I think it was a great webinar. Thank you very much, Karen, for sharing your wisdom, and especially, I think I really appreciate what you told about, and I know personally how important it is to join the WONCA groups and be active in WONCA. So it's very important in policy advocacy and also for networking and to improve as a leader. I would like to especially thank, in addition to Karen, of course, to Cheryl Chan, who's the WONCA Young Doctors lead, who's there today as the Mandarin translator. Thank you very much, Cheryl, for being with us today. And yes, that's it. And thank you very much, you all, for joining us today, despite these few technical glitches. That's fine.
Karen.
Thank you, Amanda and Sankha. And so I guess the final words are, if you're young and new, then say yes when a strange opportunity comes up. You never really know where you might end up with that opportunity 40 or 50 years later. If you're more experienced, then think about how you can lead from behind. Think about those words of Nelson Mandela. Does it mean delegating? Does it mean getting a team for something that you might have done by yourself? Does it mean being a mentor to somebody and pushing a younger person forward where you could have done yourself? So something to think about, whether you're new to policy advocacy and taking on roles, or whether you're an old hand. So thank you.
Okay, everybody, thank you for joining, and all the best for your work and commitment in your place, to you and your teams. And we'll keep working with you, we hope.